All right, looks like we've gone live. How exciting. Hello, so today I will be talking about what makes people tick. I will be talking about unconscious influences on decision making. I'm Fenja Ziegler from the School of Psychology at the University of Lincoln. If anyone is here, if there is an audience, it would be lovely to see you say hello, give a click. But if it's, if not, that's fine too. Right. So, of course, psychology, many people interested in psychology because you spend some time wondering in some way what makes people tick. So, why do I do the things that we do? What moves these little cogs in our head? And the question might be, is it just navel gazing or a fun hobby, or do the answers to the kind of questions that we might ask actually matter? Now, there are many forces that influence our decisions and our behavior, and we don't understand all of them. And I don't have time to talk about all of them, or the ones that we do. What I want to do is give you some examples of unconscious influences on decision making and a way to try and explain these things that tells us something fundamental about human nature. And by the end of this talk, I think you will agree with me that understanding what makes people tick is relevant for a great many different things, ranging on economics, response to global warming, space travel, medicine, healthcare, education, and so forth. So when people talk about decision making, they often stress the thinking part. So in many ways, reason and conscious control have been prized above all else for thousands of years. Aristotle called man the rational animal. In Shakespeare's beautiful "What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, like an angel, how like a god." Let's enjoy for a moment how remarkable we are before I burst the bubble with this burger. So how does this go? What does the burger have to do with that? Well, in the early 80s, a US restaurant chain wanted to get in on the burger money, and they released a rival to the McDonald's Quarter Pounder. So with a third pound of beef, the new burger had more meat than the Quarter Pounder. It did better in taste tests, and Ants found it was less expensive. There were lots of adverts that proclaimed all these great attributes. But the reason that you have likely never heard of the third pounder is that it completely flopped. Just people didn't buy it. Now, obviously, I wanted to find out why that was. Why is this marvelous burger flopping? And what turned out in the focus groups that they were doing is that people thought they were being overcharged. Why, they said, should they pay for a third pound of beef the same as for a quarter? So what essentially they did is they failed a simple test of fractions. They deemed a third pounder to be smaller than the quarter. Now, I'm not giving this as an example of people not being able to do maths, but an example that we're just not doing it, that we may be noble of reason and like an angel, but that we're not using these things to work out these simple problems, that a simple purchasing decision is actually swayed by not engaging reason at all. But if we don't use reason, then how do we actually make decisions? So if it's not reason, then what is it? And can we explain some of the things that we do by looking at what it is that we use to do to make decisions? So some of the things that people ask themselves are kind of questions like, why do we promise ourselves to diet and forget about it as soon as we get the first whiff of a yummy treat? Why do we buy things we don't need? Why can we spend hours trying to crack a level in a video game or learning a dance move? But even a minute of revision or study can feel like too much. So to answer these questions, let's start with something quite basic. So let's start with asking, how do you actually know what you want? And in answering that question, we're going to discover the power of relativity. So for some things, of course, you know what you want because you know what you like. So I prefer coffee to tea. So if you ask me if I'd like coffee or tea, that's really simple. I already know that I prefer coffee. It's an easy decision to make. But what about things where you don't have already a preference? What about things where a preference isn't established, something that you want to get is new, something that you care about a lot or don't care about a lot? Well, let's have a look at an example. Let's imagine that you're in the market for buying a new TV. So if you want to buy a new TV, then a quick look online and you'll see that some options. So going all the way from the smallest and cheapest at just under £700 for 36-inch TV, 42-inch 850, 50-inch for 1,480. I've left out loads of the other bewildering attributes that you might find of these kind of things. Now, when you look at this, what most people would choose is the middle one. Now, why is that? Now, the reason why that is because we rarely choose anything at all in absolute terms. We don't have an internal value meter that can tell us how much anything is worth. You know, how do you know what a 42-inch TV should cost or 36-inch? So we look at the relative advantage of one thing over another, and then estimate the value accordingly. So most of the time, we don't know what we want until we see it in some sort of context. So what phone do you want? What Bluetooth speaker system? All the way to big questions of what do you want to do with your life? The context gives us a way to really find what we want, like lights guiding us. Most of the time, we choose the middle option. And of course, marketing people and business people know that. So the one that they really want to sell is the middle one. The most expensive starter on a restaurant menu doesn't sell very much, but what it does do is it sells the second most expensive item. So when you're in the shop again at some point, have a look at the items on sale, and you always tend to find that there's some really expensive items. You might ask yourself, well, who's going to buy that? And the answer is not many people, probably even no one, but it doesn't matter. That item is usually not there to sell. That item is there to sell us some of the other things. So that is the power of relativity. Now, you might feel that, thankfully, I've now warned you about this, and you now have the power to ignore this. You have the power to ignore context. Well, let's have a look at whether this might be true. So let's have a look at the central circles here in my charming drawing. These central circles, obviously you can see this one looks smaller, this one looks larger, but they're actually absolutely the same size. I can show you with my compass. I'm not a magician, there's no trickery. I can show with a compass. This circle is the same size as that circle. It honestly is. But even though I have told you that they're the same size, you cannot see them as the same. I drew them and I cannot see them as the same. You cannot override the automatic part of your brain that gives you the size information. But you can, of course, decide to stop and think and reflect and not be taken in by this trickery. But that takes effort and time. And we could not possibly make all the decisions that we have to make every day if we went through that sort of process. And even if we could, we might not be bothered to do this. So most of the time, guided by automatic processes, and we're influenced by these sorts of decisions. Right, so the next question I want to ask is, why do we make plans and don't stick to them? So you might tell yourself some sort of things like, well, next week I'll start my diet, or, you know, tomorrow definitely I'll go for a run, or you might make some other plans like that. So the first question that we asked is, how do we know what we want? And now we ask whether we're good at predicting the future. Do I know what I will want and what will make me happy? So if we want to achieve some fundamental life goals, things like enjoyment, happiness, avoidance of pain and suffering, that's pretty non-controversial life goals, then we have to be good at predicting what choices and decisions we make will lead to these things, will lead to these outcomes. The question is, are we good at that? Well, let's look at an example. So let's look at an example where you decide to visit your aunt Ida for a week in about 6 months' time. Now, you don't always get along with Ida, and often actually you don't really even find the time to chat to her on the phone, and it's often awkward when you do talk to her, but it feels like you should go and see her. So you arrange the visit, you book the tickets. Now, what happens to thinking that this trip to see Ida is a good idea as the time of the visit is approaching? And I think what happens to the idea that this is a great idea is that it goes rapidly downhill as the time approaches for the visit. When the time comes, we just don't want to go. So why do we make decisions for the future fly in the face of what we want to do today? Now, you may, I hope, not have an aunt either, but you likely have your own experience of signing up for something in advance that you just didn't want to do anymore when the time came around to doing it. You know that the gyms are full in January and empty shortly afterwards. So we do this all the time. So why is that? And this is a really fascinating questions for psychologists and for economists and for us. And they investigate these kind of processes by asking people to make a series of decisions about money that you can have now, and about waiting for different amounts of money later. So let's look at an example. So you can ask somebody, do you want to have 200 euros now? Or do you want to have 200 euros in 6 months' time, or 4 months' time, or in some months' time, or some distance away from that? Whatever I'm going to say, it's a really easy decision, isn't it? You're going to take the 200 euros now. Why not? But you can then ask another series of questions where you compare different amounts of money. So what if you get either 200 euros now, or 400 euros in 6 months' time? Now, I don't know, maybe you will wait for the larger amount, maybe you won't. You can ask a series of questions, and then asking the series of questions, you can find out the value of money, how the value of something that we have to wait for declines with the time that we have to wait for it. So if we look at my rather crude chart, so we have the value of something, so I have 100 euros here, going all the way down to €1, and we have some sort of length of time that we have to wait. So by asking people these questions, we can find out how much the value of money declines if we have to wait for it. For some people, here in red, that's a very steep decline. So they are most impulsive people. And the value of something they have to wait for is really steeply declining. For some people, it's a little bit less. So the green line, the least impulsive, some people are somewhere in the middle. So what we can see in this is that things that we have to wait for are worth less. A healthy body that I have to wait for and exercise for compared to the cake I can have right now, the spending money compared to saving for a retirement fund, all of these kind of things. But what it also shows is that the decline in value from 0 to 5 weeks, for example, is very steep. So it declines very steeply. The 100 is worth, maybe around 90, around 50 euros at that point. But actually, if you look at from 10 to 15 weeks, it's the same having to wait an extra 5 weeks. It's a much less steep decline, it's quite flat. So we don't care about waiting the extra 5 weeks as long as it's in the future. And sometimes we can use this to rein in our impulsivity and answer this question, why do we buy things that we don't actually want in the end? It's because at the time we can have them now, they're really valuable. But if you make yourself wait just a little bit longer, I don't get it now, I'll just wait an extra day. Sometimes you might find you're not actually going to buy it at all because it has lost that attraction, has lost that value. We also know from our research that people are in principle very good at working out what is the best choice, Because when we ask them to make these decisions, not for themselves, but say for a stranger or for another person, then they're actually much less impulsive. So someone who is very impulsive, for example, for themselves, might be much less impulsive if they make this choice for someone else. So principally, you know how the process goes, but when you make choices for yourself, you just don't do it. So how can we explain all of this? Well, the way that we might explain some of this is by looking at actually what the human mind is. And the human mind might have controlled processes like reasoning why, so thinking, language, and automatic processes, seeing that, emotion, intuition, and so forth. And the automatic mind has been around for hundreds of thousands, millions of years in humans, animals, and is really good at its job of running the show. And reasoning and language are much more recent. And the newcomer did not get control of the show, but did things it does. In a really beautiful metaphor, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt talks about the elephant and the rider. I don't have an elephant to hand, but oddly enough, I have a large bear. This is Ditz, a bear, and we have a rider. Now, in this metaphor of the rider and the elephant, the automatic mind is smart and powerful and sort of does what it wants. That's our elephant, our bear. And the controlled processes, so the rider, are useful for the elephant. So the rider can see further into the future here with his goggly eyes, and it can learn new skills and new technology. And what it's very good at is it provides excellent explanations for what the elephant has already done. Whoops, we went over there. Whoa, we went over there. Oh, yeah, sure. I meant to do that for these sorts of various reasons. And what it's also very good at is it's very good at justifying and finding reasons for what the elephant or the bear wants to do next. So it's really good at that. I should be having this cake now because I had a very tough day, and of course I want to put off this diet. And in fact, I probably will have some cake after this. So if you want to influence yourself and others, it might sometimes be useful to think who you want to appeal to. The rider who feels like they're in charge, but might not really be, or maybe you really want to speak to the elephant, speak to the bear. Now, going back to Aunt Ida, the one who signed us up for the visit is this chap, isn't it? This chap signed us up for the visit to Aunt Ida, and as the time approached, more closely, and our bear or elephant got a whiff, so to speak, of Aunt Ida and realized that really wouldn't be very happy with the situation, trying to back out of it and trying to find reasons for why that might be a sensible thing to do. So think about this, how this might map onto some things in your own life. Now, getting rid of my bear for a moment, I want to come to the last question that I want to ask and try and answer, which is for me something like, why can you spend hours practicing guitar? Even 1 minute of revision or paperwork seems like too much. Why can you spend hours perfecting a dance move, play guitar, play sports with friends, playing a marching band, for example, and be as happy as can be, but even a minute of, say, revising can feel too much. So the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi investigated what makes people happy, and what he found was that apart from the obvious things like food, which you can have too much of, he found there was things like skiing and dancing or singing in a group or painting. All these kind of things made people really happy. And what they all have in common is that there's a clear challenge that fully engages your attention, and you have the skills to meet that challenge. And what this means then is that what Csikszentmihalyi said, what it means is that you're in the flow zone. You have total immersion in a task that is closely matched to your abilities. So if there's too little challenge, then we're bored. If there's too much, anxious. And in the zone, however, you are completely matched. So your skills are completely matched to the challenge, and you get immediate feedback in these tasks about how you're doing. So you feel that you nailed that dance move. You really gelled with your teammates, and got this all down. So you get hit after hit after hit of just positive feeling. It just feels great. And if we go back to our how our mind is composed for a moment, then what we find is at this point in time, in the zone, the rider and the elephant are in perfect harmony. They're working together, one mind, totally absorbed, finding flow and happiness. Everything just comes together in this moment. Right. So I made the claim at the start that understanding how people tick is important for many things, because all of these areas, whether they're policies or education or law, all of these areas depend in some way, COVID response, depend in some way on people acting in a way that we expect them to. And you might agree with some of these, and for others you might have some doubts and have to answer questions on those. But many of these things depend on people actually deciding to do what they do, how they get along, the way our mind works obviously influence that. Now, I just want to sort of just finish on a positive note. This is not meant to sort of beat up on people. And really what it's meant to demonstrate, or what it also demonstrates, is how we this demonstration of how irrational we might appear at times, it is also showing that we're fundamentally actually quite rational, because if we were not, we could not understand these demonstrations, and I wouldn't be able to explain them to you. If you find these things interesting and you want to know more about them, I can recommend the book Flow by Ali Csikszentmihalyi. I can recommend Paul Bloom's Against Empathy. And I can really recommend Jonathan Haidt's Happiness Hypothesis, and you'll get some of the ideas and some of these things certainly in more depth and more detail there. But other than that, I'll just leave it at that for now, and I'll thank you for sticking around. And that's me done for now, and I'm going to have a look at your questions. So Michelle, no elephant to hand. Well, this is I don't know how to explain this. It's obviously shocking. Who amongst us doesn't have an elephant in the house? But who amongst you has a large bear in the house? So I think I should be taking some credit for that. Overthinking during decision making. That's a really interesting question. Overthinking and decision making would be I think there are different processes going on. So you can be overthinking the decision process always, because sometimes a decision, all the times really that we make decisions, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. So there's uncertainty about it. And so we can go round and round in circles and asking ourselves questions about what if, what we do with this, what we do with that. Most of the time when we do these things, talking about very important decisions, we don't tend to overthink very small decisions. And so they are essentially based on having to have loads of attributes that you trade off against one another. So I could think that I would like to go to the cinema, but I also want to go to the pub with my friends. And there can be different things about this. So sometimes these are just quite difficult. Nicola wants to know what first sparked my interest in psychology. Nicola, I can't think that far back in time. I'm too old to remember such a distant past. I think my first interest in psychology was sparked when I realized that people do weird things and that they are different from me, which was in primary school. I was just trying to work out what people do. Michelle, are we talking about the zone of proximal development? No. So the zone of proximal development would be as a concept in developmental psychology where you think, how far is your skill as a learner, and what's the zone within which somebody could reasonably help you. So you could help a child who's already quite good at numbers to maybe learn multiplication, but you wouldn't be able to get them to do some sort of quite complex algebra or quantum mechanics. The flow zone is just meant to be this bit being in the zone, as young people used to call it, of just finding that bit where everything comes together, where your skill and challenge are matched, and you're just rocking it. You're just totally in that. George, are there certain ways that we can improve our decision making? Yes, and no. So one of the ways to improve the decision making is to actually stop and think and let the reasoning part of this, so the conscious control, do some of the talking and not just what the elephant wants, not just what the automatic processes want. So if you really, really care about a decision, then there are different things that you can do. So one of the things that really helps is to write down different things that you care about, different attributes, different outcomes. You can just count which one has, better things going for it or against it, whether it's a deal breaker and whether there isn't. One of the things that we're very good at is to convince ourselves that we are making the right decision. So also challenge your own decision. So your reasoning processes really get there. Most of the time when people make these automatic decisions, if you stop them and you get them to think about it, they actually start getting better at it. One of the things that you also find, the more you do decision making, is that it's really, really hard to know what actually is a good decision. People disagree actually on what that might be, and we assume that the other outcome might have been worse, but it might not have been. So if you want to improve your decision making, it can sometimes help to consider different attributes and really think about which one you care about, and what might sort of have a long lasting impact and effect on you. There's people saying nice things. Thank you. Can you tell us more about the connection to space travel? Right. The connection to space travel is a little bit looser. So the connection that I've made to space travel is two things. One is that and of course I'm going to completely forget the name, an astronaut who I think is called Chris Hadfield, who's a Canadian astronaut who did a video of a Bowie cover as he was on the space station, and he wrote a fantastic book called Life of an Astronaut on Earth, I think it's called. And what he talked about, and I found that so fascinating, that all astronauts go through really extensive training. So, they all stand out as pilots. They have extensive training. They train for years in NASA, and they might never be selected. And one of the ways actually to get selected to become an astronaut, to travel in space, is that you have to have the right psychology. There are a lot of psychological tests, because you cannot send people into space to live on a space station for however many weeks and months on end if they don't play well with others. So it's psychology. We're working out what makes people tick is an important part of the psychology of actually how people are selected and how we can have these successful missions. And the other thing about what makes people tick is that we know that when errors creep in, so The famous error in space travel is that for the when we had the devastating accident of the mission that in the 1980s, 1986, I think, that had the two teachers and all the astronauts on board die as the rocket exploded. Was caused by a faulty O-ring that had been exposed to colder temperature. No one wanted to say anything, so there was a series of wrong decisions that happened. So it's an example of wrong decision making. But what NASA and space travel will do is to always look at how you can make the right decision. So the decision making process is so important as you go through these things, because all these things that come together, and if they don't, then there's quite devastating consequences. The things that I talked about today won't get you or me, sadly, into space. So are the findings of the marshmallow, I can't say that word, the marshmallow experiments valid? So the marshmallow experiment is the experiment is a great one, where you have one marshmallow and then you show that to kids and you say you can have this now or you can wait and then I give you 2 marshmallows later. So it's essentially the same as the money experiment, but kids don't understand money, so you give them marshmallows. And the findings of that really are that kids who are better at waiting for the second marshmallow, it shows all sorts of differences, and they do better in education, they do better many aspects in life. They have held incredibly stable findings. So it makes sense that if we're good at putting off getting a sort of immediate reward, we're also good at studying, at learning, and all these kind of things. What I thought was really interesting is that a psychologist a few years ago, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name, did this marshmallow study, and she did it with kids who had quite an impoverished background and with a sort of quite usual middle class kids that get tested for these studies. And what her reasoning was is that there's a difference in this background that really might explain some of the differences in the study. And so what she did with the kids is that she showed them that an adult could be trusted. That if I say I'm going to do something later, I'm actually going to do it. And her reasoning was that if you live in a quite competitive environment, then you might not have that trust that really people will give you good things if you wait. And so kids who were trained with this, so kids who had this extra sort of information, found that if you run out of crayons and I say I will go get your crayons, I go get them for you, then actually they started getting better at putting off and at waiting for marshmallows. So it seemed to not be a personality component, but it seemed to be that what they were doing before was actually adaptive to the environment. If you're in a very competitive environment where maybe adults are not paying that much attention to what's happening between kids, it might make sense to just eat the first marshmallow, right? If you have older brothers or sisters like I did, they might just take it off you. So there are certainly components that mean that if you have good self-control and not being impulsive, it's the ultimate kind of self-control, and you're also going to be good at this education game, because that's all set up for having to really wait to get a good reward. So thanks for that question. Excellent question. I see nice comments. Obviously very happy with those, but I don't see any other questions. So from Ditz the Bear, all the way from Ohio, and from me, thank you very much for dropping in and listening, and I will see you soon.